Welcome back to Central Coast Radio. You are listening to Subculture, and that was Every You, Every Me. And it was a very, very special version of the song because it was actually the Cruel Intentions, the 90s musical cast that was singing it. And now that's what we are actually going to talk about because joining me here in the studio right now is Lee. Welcome back, Lee.
Thanks for having me.
And yes, we're going to take a look at Cruel Intentions, the 90s musical, which is on in Melbourne right now for anybody that's thinking about heading down that way or is living in that area. This production of Cruel Intentions, the 90s musical, started in Melbourne. It went to Sydney. It's been to the Gold Coast. I think it's been across to Perth. It has done the lap of Australia, and people are loving it so much that it is now doing an encore season back in Melbourne. Lee, you've seen this a number of times, so have I. What do you think of Cruel Intentions, the 90s musical, which is based on the 90s film Cruel Intentions?
Well, I think you have to say that the 90s music is the best part of this musical, in the fact that the vocalists have amazing harmonies. They have really great 90s music, and it really tells the story.
Now, I am going to go on a very, very deep ledge here because I am going to say that the people who cast this got this 100% right. Kirby Burgess plays Catherine Murderville, who, of course, is the Sarah Michelle Gellar part from the original movie. Drew Weston plays Sebastian Velmont, which is the Ryan Philippe part from the original movie. And Kelsey Hogg plays Annette Hargrave, who was the Reese Witherspoon character in the original movie. Now, I'm going to say that Kirby, Drew, and Kelsey are the best things in Australian theatre at the moment. Their work on this production is just absolutely amazing. We hear that word triple threat so many times, but for these three, it's the only way that you can describe it, because in this show, they sing, they dance, and they actually have to act. This is not one of those musicals where the actors can drop their guard and just rest on their singing. There's some pretty intense scenes throughout this film. There's some very sensual scenes throughout this theatre production. What did you think of that performance, considering that they had to bring so much into those roles?
Yeah, there is a lot in these roles. Now, I will say that this production is not for those who get offended easily.
No.
It is definitely for adults. It is not for kids or teenagers. It is certainly an adult production. And the storylines are sexualized. I guess within the storyline, there's a moral storylines. It's a dark story. It is not a nice, lovely story. Now, not to say that there's not lovely characters within the storyline. However, most of the story is about taking advantage of people, revenge, and really it's about a game, if you think about it. And so these actors have to bring a lot to the story, and as they're singing as well, the emotion of their characters has to really come through, as well as when they're talking on stage. The other thing is the accents, of course. They have to get the accents right.
The New York accent.
The New York accent. And I guess you can really see the difference when the actor whose real name is Drew Weston, who plays Sebastian Valmont, he speaks to the audience at the end in his Aussie accent, and for a moment you're like, hang on, what just happened? That doesn't sound like him. And you realise how well he has done to put on that New York accent, and how different he sounds as an Aussie. So that just reminds you of how much effort is going into these characters, because you could not tell that he was putting it on.
Yeah, and his is not just a New York accent. I should be more specific. His is a Manhattan accent, which is even more broader than that kind of New York accent that we all know and love. The other thing too that I think a lot of people haven't realized with this production, a lot of people talk about the original film Cruel Intentions and Dangerous Liaisons, which of course Cruel Intentions was based on, but for example, Kirby has to do more than what Michelle Pfeiffer and Sarah Michelle Gellar did in those roles because she has to sing the songs. Of course, back in the original Cruel Intentions movie, the Cruel Intentions movie wasn't a musical. It just had an iconic soundtrack with artists like Fatboy Slim, Placebo, and it was just one of those soundtracks that gave us so many classic songs. But these performers actually have to perform those tracks as well. And one of the things that makes this such a different performance is the rock band is actually on stage with them. There's times when some of the sets move and you actually see the rock band behind them, and that almost gives the feeling of rock musical like a new sense because it feels like a rock concert.
That's right. The other thing I liked about the storyline was, although the main storyline is really about Sebastian and his stepsister Catherine, there are storylines throughout it of other characters that really shine through. So there's almost like mini stories within the big story, and we get to see Cecile and her character develop and how she might be taken advantage of at times, and her performance. She's such a quirky character, and she has the audience laughing and just having fun throughout. Now, Catherine's character, her voice is powerful. She just has the whole place like watching her in awe when she performs some of the rock music. Now, within this, there is rock music and also pop, so it's not just one sort of music. And yeah, you see Annette's character and the brilliance in her performance because she's a lovely character, I guess. And but then she has to sing powerful songs.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to say I love about the music in this, because you have, of course, Placebo, The Verve, which are the two classic songs from Cruel Intentions, but also what happens with this as well is that Catherine delivers these powerful songs that many people would know by Meredith Brooks, Only Happy When It Rains by Garbage. Meanwhile, Kelsey Holge, who's playing Annette, she's delivering these heartfelt songs like Foolish Games by Jewel. Also, Drew Weston has to do one of those as well with Colorblind, one of my favourite songs off the original soundtrack. But apart from the songs, I also wanted to talk about the stage, because one of the things that's been happening in theatre in Australia over the last couple of years, we call it the Harry Potter effect. When Harry Potter, the Cursed Child, came to Australia, it did things on stage that had never been done before. And one of the big fears was that after that, nothing was ever going to wow audiences again, stage-wise. Luckily, with Cruel Intentions, they have an absolutely amazing set. The set literally comes to life. There's people constantly moving things on set as it goes from Catherine and Sebastian's Manhattan mansion through to Sebastian's aunt's house. Like, people remember the pool scene, we see that. There's outside shots supposedly of like out on the street. There's stuff at the school. They do it so amazingly well with such a minimal kind of set. There's also Sebastian's handwriting from his journal appears on the wall a lot during it as well. And I've been told if you actually read that when you're in the cinema, you actually get some interesting little insights to what's going on as well. So what did you think of the staging of this production?
Yeah, it was magnificent, actually. I enjoyed it a lot. And yeah, I guess the work that's gone into it is just incredible. I personally love the way you see the handwriting come up on the wall. And when you first arrive, you can see part of the diary, just as the backdrop for while you're waiting. The other thing I loved about this, which not all productions do, is they create the atmosphere basically as soon as you get there. They've got the 90s music in the foyer, and they're not all popular 90s music songs when you arrive, but as the time draws closer, when you go and you sit in your seat and the time is drawing close to the production starting, you start to get the bigger hits, 90s music, and already people are singing along and just anticipating and waiting for the production to start. What I also noticed was throughout the production, audience members were singing along. I was one of those people, but I did do it quietly to myself and try not to annoy the person next to me. But there were times when people were singing out loud together with the actors because of that atmosphere that was created. So in intermission, I also noticed people were singing along to those songs, standing and bopping around, just standing where their seats were and bopping around, waiting for the second half to begin. So I think they do very well. The DJ did very well as well. So while there's a live band, there's also a DJ for the lead up to the production starting and the intermission.
Yeah, everybody kind of comes in and sits down and they hear the music and you can see them going, oh, it's Janet Jackson. Am I allowed to sing along? Everybody, though, starts to sing along when they play Backstreet Boys, Backstreet's Back. I've noticed every time I've gone to see it, that's the song where people go, nah, I can't just sit here anymore. I've got to sing along to this. Now, we are going to wrap up our review of Cruel Intentions, the 90s musical, because coming up after another track from the musical, we're actually going to have Kelsey Halls, who plays Annette Hargrove, chatting to us about her role in Cruel Intentions, and that's a pretty interesting interview that I think you're all going to love out there. So to wrap up, Lee, what's your recommendation for people? Should they go along and see Cruel Intentions, the 90s musical?
Yes, you should. However, with that caveat of if you get offended easily or you're not used to kind of immoral storylines or storylines of revenge, then that's just a caution. I'm not saying don't see it, but you need to be prepared that that's what it is. But if you love 90s music, if you have seen the original movie, if you love these sorts of storylines, this is definitely for you.
Definitely. This is, I think, one of my favorite musicals that I have ever seen. I loved this movie when I first saw it when I was a teenager, so much so that I've got a cardboard cutout of the cast in my office. I've always had a copy of the soundtrack and always made sure that I've had a copy of the DVD, and seeing it come to life as a musical has just been absolutely amazing. I've been along and seen it so many times already, and I'm sure I'm going to go and see it a couple of times again. That's just how much I love it. So I would highly recommend it for anybody who grew up on this kind of music. You are going to absolutely love this, and you'll be blown away by the three leads who do such an amazing job. Talking of those leads, as I said, we are going to play another track right now from the cast. We're going to play Bittersweet Symphony, which of course most people will know via the Verve, but this is actually by the cast. And after that, we are going to talk to Kelsey Halls about her role of Annette Hargrove in Cruel Intentions, the 90s musical. You're listening to Subculture on Central Coast Radio, and here is the cast of Cruel Intentions, the 90s musical with Bittersweet Symphony.